The air inside the old villa felt heavier than usual, like grief had soaked into the drapes. The walls, once warm with the scent of jasmine tea and sandalwood, now held only the hushed echoes of polite condolences and the occasional clink of cutlery. Lena stood quietly by the bay window, her fingers wrapped around a teacup that had long since gone cold. Outside, the garden was still lush, but the absence of its gardener, her grandmother, left it eerily still. Family members moved in small clusters through the large living room. Some glanced toward Lena with practiced indifference. Others didn't look at all. She wasn't surprised. It had always been like this, ever since she chose a path they didn't understand. Her mother's side of the family, the Trans, were old money lawyers, real estate developers, and one retired politician, Lena, with her paint-stained jeans and gallery stints, didn't fit into their legacy. Aunt Mai passed by with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Glad you could make it, Lena. It's been a while." Her voice dropped into that performative sympathy people reserve for family they hope won't stay long. Lena nodded silently. She hadn't come to be welcomed. She had come for her grandmother. Behind her, a laugh cracked through the murmurs, sharp and familiar. Her Uncle Hung had arrived, still dressed in a tailored black suit with his Rolex slightly too visible. He had that confident stride Lena remembered from childhood, the man who always walked like he owned the room. Or deserved to. "Ah, there she is," Hung announced, pointing his wine glass toward Lena. "Our family's starving artist. You still painting for your supper?" A few snickers from cousins nearby. Lena felt the heat crawl up her neck, but didn't turn around. She let the words settle. She'd learned long ago that silence made men like her uncle nervous. They thrived on reaction. "I heard you're still living in a rental." "Huh." Hung pressed on, walking closer. "That gig economy life treating you well, no benefits, no pension, just vibes." Lena finally turned, slowly. Her voice was calm. "I'm doing fine. Thank you." "Oh, I'm sure you are," he said with mock warmth. "But you know, Lena, at some point, the family name can't carry dead weight forever. Your grandmother gave you a lot more patience than you deserved." That landed like a slap, but Lena didn't flinch. She'd heard worse, quieter, and more often. She believed in people, Lena said, her tone even when they didn't return the favor. Uncle Hung raised his eyebrows but didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to his wine. The conversation moved on without her. At the far end of the room, Lena spotted her cousin Tree scrolling through his phone. Across from him, someone whispered something about the will, words like division, assets, and maybe the house floated briefly in the air before being swallowed by ambient chatter. Lena didn't care about the estate. She didn't think she was mentioned in anything. Her grandmother was kind, but the family had always made it clear who the real heirs were. She was surprised she'd even been invited. A clock ticked on the mantel. Tick, tick, tick. Then, a sudden hush. The front door creaked open again. A man in his late 50s stepped in, holding a leather briefcase and wearing a charcoal suit. His posture was precise, controlled. A few of the elders recognized him immediately. "That's Kwang," Aunt Mai whispered. "Your grandmother's lawyer." Kwang gave a polite nod. "Thank you for gathering. If everyone would please move to the main salon, I'll begin the reading of Madame Han's final testament." The room shuffled. Chairs creaked. Lena found herself between two armchairs as everyone else filled in the larger seats and couches. Her uncle poured more wine. His wife adjusted her pearls, and someone discreetly shut off the classical music playing in the background. Kwang cleared his throat and opened the folder. "As executor of Madame Hantran's estate, I am here to fulfill her final wishes, which she documented thoroughly over the past 2 years. I will now read directly from her signed and witnessed testament. The room held its breath. To my son, Hung Trun, Kwang began, I leave my collection of rare books and the family's silver tea set, in recognition of his commitment to preserving appearances. A flicker of confusion passed across Hung's face. That was not what he expected. Kwang continued. To my and the rest of my children and grandchildren who have always shown up for holidays and photos, I leave my gratitude for keeping the family name alive. To each. I leave a token of memory, a keepsake from my jewelry box, or a memento of our shared history. You will find your name labeled accordingly. Now whispers started. And to my granddaughter, Lena Tran. Kwang paused, eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. I leave the house, the entire estate, its remaining funds, and all rights to convert it into whatever she dreams. Silence. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. To the one who sat with me when I could no longer walk, who brought me soup when no one noticed I was sick, who asked nothing and gave everything, this is yours. May you build something beautiful. No one moved. No one breathed. Lena stared at Kwang, unsure if she had heard correctly. The entire estate. The house Uncle Hung blinked, what Aunt Mai's mouth opened, then closed. Someone knocked over a teacup, but no one bent to pick it up. Lena lowered her eyes, unsure whether to stand or speak. Kwang nodded once toward her and spoke gently. There will be paperwork to sign. But for legal purposes, Miss Tran is now the sole heir of this estate, valued at approximately $1.8 million. Uncle Hung stood abruptly. This is a joke. No, sir, Kwang said firmly. It's in writing, witnessed, and notarized. Your mother was of sound mind. Lena stood up slowly. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. But in that moment, every insult, every dismissal, every look of pity or mockery over the years settled like dust and vanished. She had not asked for this, but she had earned it. The silence cracked, not from words, but from the scrape of Uncle Hung's chair legs against the wooden floor. He had stood too fast, too aggressively, and now stood there blinking, hands clenched at his sides. This doesn't make sense, he said, his voice shaking, though whether with anger or disbelief, no one could quite tell. She was old, confused. Someone manipulated her. Across the room. Aunt Mai tried to soothe him with a hand on his arm, but he shook her off. Lena remained still, grounded. Her hands hung by her sides, not clenched, not triumphant, just present. Lawyer Kwang's expression didn't change. Your mother updated her will 6 months ago. I visited her here personally, 3 separate times. She knew what she was doing. But Lena Hung turned, voice rising. She's an artist. She doesn't even have a real job. How could she possibly be the one your mother trusted most? Kwang finished gently. Perhaps you'd have to ask her that. But I believe her will already answered. The air felt cold. Lena's cousin Tree muttered something under his breath, then looked down as his mother shot him a warning glance. No one had moved to congratulate her. No one even offered a nod of acknowledgement. The room had turned her into a ghost in reverse, visible only because they suddenly saw her as a threat. She turned toward Kwang. What happens now? We'll need to schedule a signing. I can walk you through the transfer of deed and accounts. There are also some letters she left. One of them is for you. He extended a small, cream-colored envelope. Lena hesitated only briefly before taking it. Her name was written in her grandmother's unmistakable, careful script. She didn't open it yet. I'll arrange everything, Kwang added. You don't need to speak further to anyone unless you wish. She nodded slowly. Uncle Hung let out a low laugh, a sound of disbelief edged with fury. So this is it. After all we've done for her, for this family, she gives it to someone who paints sunflowers and sells them for pennies. Lena turned to face him. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but resolute. You weren't there. He blinked. You weren't there the night she fell and hit her head in the hallway. I stayed up watching her breathe, afraid she'd stop in her sleep. You weren't there when she forgot how to use the microwave, or when she cried because she couldn't remember where she put her wedding ring. I was. Her voice didn't tremble, but her fingers did. You sent flowers for her birthday. I brought her dinner. You visited for Tet. I lived here for 2 years. It wasn't about money. It never had been. But now that the money was there, everyone looked at her like she had stolen it. Kwong stepped forward. I believe that concludes the reading. If there are no further questions, I'll be in touch with Miss Tran directly. As he packed up his papers, people began to stir. A few murmured to each other. No one approached Lena. She left the room without a backward glance. The garden smelled like memory. She stepped outside into the dying afternoon light. A crisp breeze tugged at her coat. Everything looked the same. The potted thatch thow still sat on the low brick wall, just starting to wither in the autumn chill. Her grandmother had planted those flowers herself, insisting they were lucky, even when the neighbors swore they attracted bees. Lena walked slowly toward the wooden bench near the fountain. It creaked as she sat, just like it always had. She held the letter in her lap. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she opened the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of thick paper. The handwriting was shaky but strong. My dearest Lena, you never asked for anything from me. That is why I gave you everything. I know they never saw you, but I did. You listened to my stories even when they had no endings. You made me feel like I still mattered when even I had started to forget that. They will call this unfair. But you and I both know love is never divided fairly in this family. It is measured in appearances, in degrees hung on walls, in bank accounts, not in time, not in care, not in presence. This house is yours. Make it loud with joy, or quiet with art, or warm with tea and friends. Make it your own, and don't forget to water the thak thao. They like mornings best, with love that lasts beyond memory. Ba. Lena folded the letter slowly, pressing it to her chest for a moment. The wind rustled the hedges. A single petal from the flowers fluttered down onto her knee. She sat there a long while. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel victorious. She felt real, grounded, present. The door opened behind her. She heard hesitant footsteps and turned slightly. Her cousin Anne stood there, arms folded, eyes averted. Hey, Anne said, awkward. Hi. A beat passed. So, you're really getting the house? Lena nodded and looked down. I always thought you were weird. Sorry. Lena raised an eyebrow but said nothing. I didn't know you were, like, there for Ba like that. I guess I thought you were just hiding from life or something. I wasn't hiding, Lena said. I was choosing, and glanced at the flowers. Are you going to sell the place? No, Lena said. I'm going to turn it into something new. And looked surprised. Like what I don't know yet, she said honestly. But it'll be something worth remembering. And didn't respond. After a moment, he gave a small nod and walked back inside. Lena stood up, brushed the petal from her lap, and walked to the corner of the garden where the bamboo trellis stood. Her grandmother used to hang wind chimes there, each with a different tone. They were gone now, probably packed away or broken, but she could still hear them in her memory. She imagined laughter, music, paint, books on every surface, the smell of Bondao sun and roasted tea. She imagined life here, her life, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a fantasy. It felt like a plan. The next morning brought a kind of stillness that didn't feel like grief anymore. It felt like potential. Lena woke in the guest room upstairs, the same one she had stayed in during those 2 long years with her grandmother. The sun filtered through lace curtains, casting soft patterns across the wooden floor. She sat up slowly. Her first instinct was to check her phone, but then she remembered she had turned it off the night before. Too many messages had come in after the will was read. Some from cousins she hadn't heard from in years. "Just checking in," they wrote. Others less subtle, asking if she had any plans for the house, if she needed help managing the estate, if she might consider sharing some part of it for family legacy purposes. She hadn't replied to any of them. Lena got dressed in quiet routine soft flannel, wool socks, the same denim jeans with a fading smear of paint on the thigh. Downstairs, she found the kitchen exactly as it had been before, clean but not sterile. Her grandmother's teapot still sat on the stove, its porcelain chipped along the spout. She filled it with water, lit the flame, and waited for the soft hiss of warmth returning. As the tea steeped, Lena opened her grandmother's cabinet of preserves. Rows of glass jars stared back at her: plum, apricot, kumquat, ginger. She remembered helping label them, handwriting the months in blocky black ink. 100 quiet afternoons with nothing but the soft rustle of paper, the clink of jars, and the sound of her grandmother humming from the next room. She poured herself a cup of tea and carried it outside. The garden looked different in daylight. There was still a faint layer of frost on the grass, but the flowers, those stubborn thatched thou, held their violet proudly. The stone path needed sweeping. The shed leaned a little more than it had last spring, but it all felt alive, like it had been waiting. She sat on the edge of the patio and opened her sketchbook, the one she hadn't touched in weeks. Her hands moved automatically, rough outlines, soft strokes, the beginnings of a new space. Not just for her, but for others, for artists, for people like her who had been told their work didn't matter because it didn't pay like law or medicine or real estate. She imagined converting the back portion of the house into open studios. The sunroom could be a reading nook or tea lounge. The attic might hold small exhibitions, intimate, imperfect, real. But she needed help. Not from her family. From people who understood the language of doing things slowly, purposefully, with hands that had known both creation and rejection. She sipped her tea and took out her phone. It buzzed back to life, instantly pinging with notifications. Ignoring them, she opened her email and typed a message to her old mentor from art school, Mrs. Din, who had once told her that spaces shape stories as much as stories shape spaces. Subject: Studio Sanctuary Project. Body. Hi, Mrs. Din. Something unexpected happened. I inherited my grandmother's house, yes. That house, and I want to turn it into something more than just a home, a place where artists can work, rest, connect. I don't know exactly what it will look like yet, but I know I can't do it alone. Are you open to a conversation warmly? Lena. She hit send. Then, finally, she opened one of the messages from her family. It was from Aunt Lena. I hope you understand how much of a shock this was for everyone. Your grandmother was not always clear in her later years. We're not contesting anything, but it would mean a lot if you considered opening the house for family gatherings like we used to. Maybe we can talk soon. Lena stared at the message for a moment, then closed it. No response. She needed time to shape the house before inviting people back into it. Later that day, a knock came at the front door. Lena opened it to find a man in his 30s, tall and a little unsure of himself. He wore work gloves and had a folder under one arm. Hi, he said. I'm Tum. I used to help your ba with the garden. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should check in on the place. Lena blinked. She asked you to come. He nodded. She paid me for the full year in advance. Said she didn't want the garden going to rot if, you know. A warmth spread through Lena's chest. Of course, her grandmother would think that far ahead. I could start this week, Tom said. The trellis needs reinforcing, and the pond's filter probably needs changing. I kept a key to the shed, if that's okay. Lena smiled. It's okay. Welcome back. Tom grinned. Nice to meet you properly. Then, as he left to fetch his tools, Lena stepped back into the house. She walked slowly down the hall, running her hand along the wall where the family portraits had once hung. Most of them had been taken down, stacked in boxes, but one still remained a photo of her and her grandmother in the garden, both holding paintbrushes. Mid-laugh, she didn't remember anyone taking that picture. That night, Lena cooked a simple dinner: steamed rice, fried tofu, pickled mustard greens, and ate alone at the old wooden table, but it didn't feel lonely. She opened her sketchbook again and wrote 3 words at the top of a new page. Nakwaba. Grandma's house. It would be the name of the space. A tribute. A declaration. A beginning. The following week passed in a quiet rhythm Lena hadn't felt in years. Mornings began with tea, sketching, and garden walks with Tum, who spoke little but worked with a kind of patience that reminded her of her grandmother. The two of them shared silent understandings. He'd nod toward a stubborn vine needing trimming, and she'd fetch the clippers without a word. On Wednesday, she received a reply from Mrs. Din. Lena, I remember that house. I remember your grandmother. She came to every student exhibition you invited her to, even the rainy ones. She once told me your art was her favorite kind of rebellion. I'd love to help. Din. That email sparked something. Lena began drafting a vision board, nothing fancy, just a series of sketches taped along the dining room wall, floor plans of studio spaces, a rotating artist residency calendar, a reading alcove near the window. She repurposed the old tea room into a planning space, where color swatches and notes were pinned beside dried flower stems. Word started to spread. She hadn't posted anything public, but a few artists she knew began messaging her. One had heard from another that Lena was building something beautiful. One offered to design the website. Another asked if she could help refurbish the attic into a live workspace. But not everyone's interest was so pure. On Sunday morning, a familiar knock echoed at the front door. She opened it to find her Uncle Hung, dressed sharply as always, standing stiff with a bottle of imported whiskey in hand. Lena, he said with a smile far too polite to be real. Can I come in? She stared at him for a moment, then stepped aside. He walked in like he still belonged here, scanning the room quickly, the tea room now a vision space, the garden visible through clean windows. His gaze lingered on the folder of grant applications Lena had begun researching. I didn't come to argue, he said after a moment, placing the whiskey on the kitchen counter. I came to talk. She raised an eyebrow. About, he folded his arms, about making this work. For the family. Lena remained silent, letting him reveal what he really meant. Look, I was caught off guard that day, he began. We all were, but I've been thinking, maybe this house can be more than just some quiet retreat. You've got momentum right now. Press, attention. Why not leverage that? There's no press, Lena said. Yet, he replied. But it's coming, especially when people find out who your grandmother was and what she left behind. He stepped closer, voice lowering like he was letting her in on a secret. You could make this into something big. Not just a local gallery, a real cultural hub, brand partnerships, investment, maybe even a franchise model. Grandma's house could be the next artistic Airbnb curated spaces, rural experiences, nostalgia driven design. No, Lena said firmly. He paused. Excuse me, no, she repeated. This isn't about scale. It's about intention. Hung frowned. You're sitting on $1 million property. You're telling me you're not even considering its full potential. I'm building something that can't be bought or copied, she said. A place for artists who need rest, not exposure. For voices like mine that never got invited to the real table. He scoffed. That's emotional thinking. It's human thinking. They stood in silence, separated by the invisible years between them, her childhood filled with his offhand comments, his dismissals of her little art projects, the times he asked if she'd grown out of the paintbrush phase yet. You know this isn't sustainable, he said finally. You'll run out of money. You'll get tired. You don't have experience running anything like this. Maybe, she said, but at least I'll fail on my terms. He let out a short laugh, more irritated than amused. You're really not going to let anyone help you. I'm letting the right people help, she said. Just not the ones who only show up when there's a title to slap on the door. Hung's expression darkened. You're making a mistake. I've made plenty, Lena replied, but listening to you won't be another one. He stared at her, like trying to figure out who this version of his niece was. Then he turned, left the whiskey on the counter, and walked out without another word. Lena stood still long after the door shut. She didn't feel proud. She felt steady. That night, she pulled an old box of her grandmother's things from the attic: notes, photos, handwritten recipes. In one envelope was a photo Lena had never seen her grandmother, younger, standing in front of a dusty village schoolhouse holding a piece of chalk. A single word was written on the back: begin. Lena ran her fingers over the letters. Maybe this wasn't just inheritance. Maybe it was continuation. She lit a candle beside the photo and opened her sketchbook again. On a new page, she drew the front of the house, not how it looked now, but how it might look soon: vines trimmed, windows glowing, people inside laughing, painting, sharing soup. A place where someone could come with nothing but an idea and leave with a little more hope. She titled the sketch, First Light. The attic creaked under Lena's footsteps as she climbed the narrow stairs, a small lantern in hand. Though it was late spring outside, the attic still held the chill of forgotten seasons. Dust motes danced through the light, and the wooden beams above groaned softly with the wind. She hadn't been up here in years, not since her grandmother stopped climbing stairs altogether. She stepped carefully past stacked trunks and crates, their edges frayed with time. This was the part of the house no one cared about, except her. Even when she was young, she'd been drawn to its silence. It was here, hidden among old quilts and unused picture frames, that she first set up her easel. Here, where she painted in secret. In the far corner, beneath a faded canvas dropcloth, was her first real painting, an abstract interpretation of the house. She'd forgotten it still existed. She pulled it out, dusted it gently, and stared. The brushstrokes were raw, erratic, but there was truth in it, a kind of reckless hope only a 16-year-old could paint. She smiled. Tomorrow, this space would be cleared. She had already spoken to 2 carpenters friends of Tom who agreed to help renovate the attic. It would become the first residency studio. The plan was simple: 1 artist, 1 month, full room and board, no expectations except to rest and create, no deliverables, no networking, just space. She climbed back down, feeling lighter. That evening, she sat by the kitchen table with Mrs. Dinn, who had driven in from her retirement home 2 towns away. Her hair had gone fully silver, and her hands were thinner now, but her voice still carried the same steady wisdom Lena remembered from art school. "You know," Dinn said, sipping her tea, "your grandmother once told me something I never forgot." Lena leaned in. "What?" She said, "My granddaughter doesn't paint what she sees, she paints what you forgot was there." Lena's breath caught. "She believed in you before you did," Din added, gently placing a hand over Lena's. "Don't let anyone turn this into something she wouldn't recognize." "I won't," Lena said softly. They spent the rest of the night sketching floor plans and debating paint colors. By midnight, they had a rough blueprint for the first 3 rooms: a shared studio space, a tea lounge, and an upstairs residency bedroom with wide south-facing windows. But even as she planned the future, ghosts of the past hovered. The next morning brought rain, a soft, persistent drizzle that turned the garden soil into velvet. Lena stood under the awning watching it fall when a voice called from the gate, "Lena." She turned. Her cousin Thao stood there, umbrella in hand, hair damp from the walk. "I brought something," Thao said, holding up a plastic container. Lena blinked. "Is that Grandma's ginger chicken?" Thao said. "Well, my attempt at it." She stepped inside and kicked off her boots. They sat at the kitchen table again, 2 bowls between them. "I heard what happened," Thao said after a long silence. "And I just want you to know, not all of us think you don't deserve it." Lena looked up, surprised. "You were here. We weren't. That's the truth." Lena said nothing, unsure if she was ready to accept the sentiment or the person offering it. Thao glanced down at her food. "I used to be jealous of you, you know." Lena nearly laughed. "Jealous of me?" "Yeah," Thao said, shrugging. "You had courage. You left. You didn't stay to play the game. The rest of us. We played. And now I look around and realize I don't know what any of it was for." The honesty hit harder than Lena expected. "I'm opening the house," Lena said after a pause. "For artists, for people who need space, no portfolio needed. Just need—" Tao smiled faintly. "That's beautiful." "You can come," Lena added. "If you ever want quiet." Tao nodded, eyes glistening. "I'd like that." After she left, Lena wandered into her grandmother's room for the first time in weeks. It smelled faintly of lemongrass and cedar. On the nightstand sat an old radio, a worn copy of Tuluk Vanduan short stories, and a photo of Lena at age 10, holding up a painting of a dragon with far too many legs. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The house felt warmer now. Not because of insulation or renovations, but because presence had returned. Not obligation, not expectation, presence. Later that day, a knock came again. It was Kwang, the lawyer, holding a small box. "This was in her private drawer," he said. "She asked me to give it to you once you'd settled in." Lena opened the lid. Inside was a set of antique brass keys, a folded handkerchief, and a handwritten note. "For the doors no one else knows are there." She stared at the keys. In the days that followed, she tried every lock in the house, every drawer and cabinet. All the keys matched known places except one. It was smaller than the rest, with a rose-shaped tip. And one afternoon, as she dusted the shed, she found a trapdoor beneath an old rug, locked. The rose key clicked smoothly. Inside a hidden cellar, a single bulb buzzed to life, revealing rows of preserved paintings her grandmother's. Dozens of them. Landscapes and still lifes and portraits, all signed with a delicate T. Lena had never known her grandmother painted. And yet, somehow, she had always known. She stepped down, heart pounding, and pulled the dustcloth from one, a scene of the garden in full spring bloom. Her favorite chair, her favorite tea set, a young girl painting on the steps. It was her. And in that moment, Lena understood this house wasn't her inheritance. It was their shared canvas. The cellar became her favorite place in the house. Each time Lena descended those narrow wooden steps, it felt like stepping through time not backwards, but deeper, into something layered and alive. The air was cool and still, scented faintly with linseed oil and lavender. She moved carefully between rows of her grandmother's hidden paintings, each canvas whispering a story that had never been told. There were scenes of quiet domesticity, a bowl of light cheese, a shadow of rain on a wooden floor, a half-sewn ow dye draped over a chair. But there were also bolder works, an abstract swirl of crimson and ochre that pulsed with emotion, a jagged horizon line that felt like it had been torn from the sea itself. Lena stared at that one for a long time. Why had her grandmother kept this a secret? Or maybe, Lena thought, she hadn't. Maybe no one had ever asked. She carefully documented each piece, photographing them in natural light, noting their dimensions and signatures. A few canvases were cracked, some yellowed with age. She made a plan to preserve them, restore what she could. These works would form the first official exhibition of the new space hidden brushstrokes, the private art of Hantran. But she wouldn't rush. This house would not be another gallery chasing trends. It would be a place that honored slowness, privacy, the courage of creating without applause. As the days passed, volunteers trickled in, old friends from school, young artists who'd heard through word of mouth, even two retired teachers who wanted to help organize the house's growing art library. Tom kept the grounds impeccable, transforming the overgrown garden into a sanctuary of jasmine, basil, and blooming hibiscus. He even built a small bamboo arch over the stone path, just like the one Lena remembered from childhood stories. The first resident artist arrived at the end of the month. Her name was Rena, a ceramicist from Dalat who had been struggling with creative burnout. She stepped into the house with eyes wide, her fingers twitching with nerves. Lena welcomed her with warm rice, soft tofu, and a simple promise. You don't owe us anything except your presence. Rena cried that first night. Then she slept 12 hours straight. By the end of the week, she was sculpting again. Word was spreading faster than Lena expected. Journalists reached out, small blogs, local magazines. She declined most interviews, but allowed one piece in a community arts scene, written by a young writer who had also grown up being told that creativity wasn't a real future. Lena's inbox flooded. Applications, letters, donations. Someone even offered to sponsor an entire year of residencies anonymously. Still, the emails from her family lingered at the bottom, unopened, until one caught her eye. Subject: I'd like to come clean. From Lillian. Tran at. It was her cousin, the one who, at the family gathering, had laughed loudest at Uncle Hung's failure remark. The one who used to call Lena the dropout behind her back. The one who had the cleanest resume and the coldest hugs. She clicked it. Lena, I won't pretend I suddenly understand you. I don't. But I've been thinking a lot since that day. About who we were taught to admire. About what we were told mattered. I've spent the last 10 years chasing status, promotions, applause. And yet, I've never made anything with my own hands. Never sat in silence and felt whole. I was awful to you. I'm sorry. If you're open to it, I'd like to visit the house, just as a person, not as your cousin, not as someone looking for an angle, just someone curious, someone tired. Lillian Lena reread the email 3 times. She didn't feel anger or vindication. She felt a small, unexpected tenderness. That night, she wrote back, "Come next weekend. Bring walking shoes. I'll put the kettle on." The weekend arrived with golden light. Lillian stepped out of a cab in pressed slacks and flats that clearly weren't meant for garden paths. She looked smaller than Lena remembered. Or maybe Lena just looked at her differently now. "Hi," Lillian said. Awkward. "Hi." They stood quietly, then hugged stiffly, briefly, but it was something. Lena led her through the garden, past Rena's ceramics drying under the sun, past the tea room with its mismatched chairs and quiet chatter. They walked without speaking until they reached the bench by the rosemary bush. The air smelled of earth and mint. Lillian sat first. "It's beautiful here," she murmured. Lena nodded. "It's honest." A long pause. Then Lillian spoke again. "Why didn't you ever fight back all those years? When we mocked you, dismissed you, I was busy trying to stay whole," Lena said. "Fighting would have torn me apart." Lillian looked down. "I used to think you were weak." "I know. I don't anymore." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full. Lillian reached into her bag and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper, tied with a silk ribbon. "It's not much," she said. "Just something I saw at a bookstore that reminded me of you." Lena unwrapped it. Inside, The Art of Solitude by Stephen Batchelor. She smiled. They sat for a while longer, listening to the wind in the trees, the faint chime of a spoon against a teacup inside. Finally, Lillian stood. "Thank you for letting me in. You're welcome." As her cousin walked away, Lena didn't feel triumphant. She felt rooted. And in that rootedness, something had shifted not just in Lillian, but in Lena too. For so long she had defined herself by what her family denied her. Now, she was beginning to define herself by what she offered even to those who once rejected her. The next morning, Lena rose before dawn. The house was silent but humming with life, the kind of quiet that came not from emptiness, but from things resting, waiting. Rena's wheel had left faint clay specks along the porch. A bowl of soaked mung beans waited to be steamed for breakfast. In the distance, the wind teased the bamboo archway, making it creak softly like a sleeping voice. Lena wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped into the cellar once more. The restoration process for her grandmother's paintings had begun. She'd invited in a conservator, an elderly man with soft hands and a magnifying glass always looped around his neck. He had studied the brushwork with reverence, noting influences Lena had never known. Her grandmother had absorbed a touch of Impressionism, traces of post-war melancholy, and even a few bold gestures that bordered on the avant-garde. "Your grandmother," he'd whispered once, eyes shining, "was no hobbyist." Now, the finished works lined one wall of the newly cleared gallery room, the former dining room. Transformed, white walls, soft track lights, no plaques, no fanfare, just the paintings, breathing. Hidden Brushstrokes was scheduled to open in 3 weeks, and already people were calling, some from local museums, others from Vietnamese art historians who had never heard of Han Tran, but were suddenly desperate to learn more. But Lena, despite the flurry of interest, kept saying no. No to exclusive previews, no to press kits, no to commercialization. "This is a home first," she told them, "an invitation second." That morning, she spent an hour cataloging the last of the stored works. One painting in particular stopped her cold, a portrait of her, unfinished. She was seated at the garden bench, eyes downcast, paintbrush in hand. The lines of her face were soft, uncertain. The rest of the canvas was just faint outlines, gestures of intention never completed. Lena gently laid a hand over the frame. She wasn't sure why her grandmother had never finished it, but she understood now that not all art needs resolution. Some things are most powerful left open. Later that day, she met with Tom out by the shed to inspect the solar lighting system they'd been installing for the garden path. Tom had been arriving earlier and staying later lately, sometimes sharing a quiet dinner with Lena when the other residents were tucked away in their rooms. "Something on your mind?" he asked, glancing up from the wiring. Lena hesitated. "Do you think I'm doing too much?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he adjusted the panel, then stood, brushing off his hands. "I think you're doing something that matters," he said simply. "And that kind of work always feels like too much." She nodded. That night, after the dinner dishes were cleaned and the resident writers had retreated to their notebooks and floor pillows, Lena sat alone on the back patio with her leather notebook, the same one she'd filled with sketches and scribbled floor plans, now full of real things, quotes from residents, fragments of poems, grocery lists scrawled beside breakthroughs. She turned to a blank page and wrote, "We were taught to chase applause, but no one taught us how to stand still when no one is watching. This house is teaching me that." Slowly, daily, the next day, an unexpected letter arrived. It came in a navy blue envelope with no return address. The handwriting on the front was loose and slanted. Lena opened it carefully. Inside was a single-page note. To Lena, "You don't know me, but I heard about your space through a friend of a friend. I just wanted to say thank you, not for anything you've done for me personally, but for building something I didn't know I needed to believe existed. I'm a failed novelist, or maybe just one who hasn't finished anything in years. Your story reminded me that making things without a spotlight is still making. Maybe I'll try again. That matters. Please don't let anyone convince you otherwise. K." Lena held the letter for a long time. It wasn't affirmation she needed, but this. This felt like a thread, a quiet connection across unseen space. She tucked the letter into the pocket of her notebook. That evening, she stood at the front door of the house and stared at the small iron plaque they had installed above the entrance, a silhouette of a woman holding a brush and a sprig of rosemary. No name, no hours, just the symbol. Rena came up beside her. Clay still dusted across her sweater. "I used to think art was about being seen," Rena said. "Now I think it's about seeing." Lena smiled. "That's what Ba used to say too." As the stars began to bloom above them, one by one, Lena felt something she hadn't known she needed: stillness without loneliness. For so long, she had measured worth by rejection. Now she measured it by presence. Inside, the house was full not of noise, but of people breathing, creating, being. No one asked for output. No one demanded results. They were simply allowed to exist. And in that, they grew. Lena closed the front door softly behind them. The soft shuffle of slippers against the hardwood floors had become a morning rhythm in the house. Each day began not with alarms or meetings, but with the small rituals of presence: the clinking of teacups, the creak of the garden gate, the gentle hum of creativity waking. By mid-June, Nyakwaba had quietly become a sanctuary, not just for artists, but for anyone who needed to exhale. The residency was still in its pilot phase, but already word had spread. Applications came in from around the country: a young muralist grieving the loss of a parent, a retired opera singer searching for her voice again, a queer playwright from Hugh looking for a place to write without watching their back. Lena read every application personally. No resume, no portfolio, just letters, stories, hopes. She chose not based on skill, but on need. On the first Sunday of the month, she hosted the house's first open tea gathering. No press, No donors, just locals, neighbors, former students of her grandmother, and a few curious passers-by who'd heard about the mysterious art house that smelled like rosemary and always played soft music at dusk. They came with offerings: home-baked bread, dried lotus tea, tiny jars of honey. One woman brought a single red chili plant in a terracotta pot. "This was your grandmother's favorite variety," she said shyly. "She gave me seeds 20 years ago. It's time I gave something back." Lena was overwhelmed. The back garden became a circle of voices, some hesitant, others bubbling with stories about her grandmother. How she once taught a neighborhood kid to read under the tamarind tree. How she painted murals in the primary school long after her hands started to shake. How she once sewed an entire class set of costumes when the budget got cut. She was quiet. One neighbor said, "but never small." That line stayed with Lena. She wrote it down that night in her notebook. Quiet, but never small. The next morning, a man Lena didn't recognize arrived at the front gate. Middle-aged, carefully dressed, carrying a thin portfolio case, he introduced himself in accented Vietnamese. "I'm Dr. Charles Nguyen. I'm a curator from the Asian American Art Archive in Boston." Lena narrowed her eyes. "I didn't request any press." "I'm not press," he said, offering a polite smile. "I'm here because your grandmother was one of the founding members of the archive's original collective, back in the 70s. Lena blinked. "I didn't know that." He nodded slowly. "Not many do." "She used a pseudonym, Min Ha. We've been trying to locate more of her work for years. Her early pieces were bold, political. Then she vanished." Lena felt her breath catch. She was afraid. She said quietly, "Afraid that the art she made would bring trouble for the family, so she buried it." Dr. Nguyen looked at her with a kind of reverence. "And yet, she painted anyway." "That's the kind of courage we want to honor." He gently placed a pamphlet on the table. It showed a black and white photo of an art protest in 1978. Near the edge stood a young woman, her face half turned from the camera. Lena recognized the shape of her cheekbone, her eyes. "That's her," she whispered. "We'd like to feature her in an upcoming retrospective," he said, "if you're open to it." Lena didn't respond immediately. That night, she stood alone in the restored cellar, surrounded by the hidden works of a woman she thought she knew. She traced the edge of one canvas, a chaotic swirl of red and gold, titled simply, "April 30th, a war wound, a memory." She thought about what it meant to share these works, to open her grandmother's silence to public view, to tell a story that had been buried in the walls of a house. Would it be a betrayal or a fulfillment? She sat on the cellar step and wrote, "My grandmother painted in secret not because she lacked pride, but because she lacked permission. And now, I can offer that permission back on her behalf. Not for legacy, but for truth." The next morning, she called Dr. Nguyen. "We can talk. But I want to help shape how she's remembered." "Of course," he said, "it's your story too." In the days that followed, Lena began curating a second exhibition, parallel to Hidden Brushstrokes. This one would be titled Min Ha: The Unnamed Years. It would tell the story not only of the art, but of the silence around it. The attic became an archival room. Volunteers helped scan, document, and translate fragments of journals Lena had found tucked between old newspapers and sewing patterns. Rena offered to create ceramic display cases for the more fragile pieces. Another resident, a calligrapher, began restoring her grandmother's handwritten labels with brush and ink. It was not fast work, but it was holy. And somewhere between the sorting and scanning, Lena felt something shift. For months she had thought of herself as the one carrying her grandmother's legacy forward, but now she realized they were walking together. One voice paused, another voice continuing. Each brushstroke a conversation between past and present. Late one evening, Lena walked into the cellar with a clean canvas under her arm. She set it on the easel where her grandmother's last painting had once rested. She picked up a brush, and for the first time in a long time, she began to paint without fear, without purpose, without an audience. Just her, just now, just enough. The night before the dual exhibitions opened, the house was quiet in a different way, no longer the stillness of anticipation, but of something sacred about to begin. The walls hummed with energy, filled with the stories of two women who had lived in the same body, across two eras. Lena sat alone in the old tea room, surrounded by candles and soft shadows, her fingers tracing the rim of a porcelain cup once used by her grandmother. The front of the house had been swept, the bamboo arch tied with strands of dried jasmine, the old family portraits, once boxed and forgotten, were now reframed, placed not in positions of prominence, but among the visitors' spaces, as silent observers rather than silent judges. And yet, part of Lena still braced herself for the return. She had extended an invitation, weeks earlier, to the entire family. It wasn't out of obligation. It was a test, not for them, but for herself. Could she face them without shrinking? Could she let them witness her world, not with defiance, but with peace? She didn't know who would come, or what they would say, but she was ready either way. They began arriving early the next morning. Friends, artists, neighbors, curious strangers. Then, one by one, her family. Aunt Mai walked through the gate first, dressed in modest gray, holding a bouquet of gardenias. Her expression was unreadable, but she handed the flowers to Lena with a quiet, "Your ba would have loved these." Behind her came Cousin Tao, smiling shyly, followed by others Lena hadn't seen since the reading of the will. Faces she'd once associated only with dismissal now looked softer, more curious than cold. And then her Uncle Hung. He arrived alone, no tie this time, no visible arrogance, just a man with grayer temples and a look that couldn't quite settle between guilt and awe. Lena met his gaze and nodded politely. He nodded back. No apology. But not all things require one to be recognized. The house filled quickly. Whispered awe passed from room to room. The exhibition layout told two stories, hidden brushstrokes, arranged with warm lights and handwritten captions in Lena's voice. And Minha, the unnamed years, arranged in stark, archival-style redacted letters. Protest sketches, bold headlines that Lena had painstakingly translated and curated. Dr. Nguyen, dressed simply in a pressed white shirt, gave a brief speech in the garden. He spoke of resilience, of undocumented legacies, of art as resistance. He ended with, "Sometimes, the loudest revolutions begin in silence." The applause was not thunderous, but it was sincere. Lena stood at the garden's edge, watching. Then came the moment she hadn't prepared for. Her father. He arrived late, as if unsure he would come at all. He stood by the gate, unmoving. They hadn't spoken in 3 years. Not since he had dismissed her decision to leave the corporate path and waste her potential. Not since he told her, without blinking, that art was a hobby, not a future. Now, he walked slowly down the stone path, glancing at the bamboo trellis, the small plaque on the house, the open windows where music drifted softly. He found her near the rosemary bush. For a long time, he said nothing. "Then I didn't know she painted." Lena looked down. "Neither did I." He nodded slowly. "She was always quiet about the things that mattered most. So was I." Lena replied. He studied her for a moment. This place? It's something. She met his eyes. It's enough. He didn't answer that, but after a pause, he added, I saw your name in that magazine. You didn't mention any of us. That was on purpose. A beat, then, quietly fair. The silence between them wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile. It was the silence of two people standing on the bridge between damage and dignity. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph creased and yellowed. It was Lena as a child, maybe 7, painting in the backyard with a plastic palette. Her grandmother stood behind her, arms crossed, smiling. She sent this to me once, he said. Told me you had something special. Lena took the photo, unsure how to feel. Why didn't you ever tell me, she asked. I didn't know how to understand you, he admitted. So I didn't try. He turned away, already leaving. But before he stepped through the arch, he added, She would have been proud of you, I think. I might be too. And then he was gone. Lena stood there, the photo in her hand, the wind lifting her hair gently from her shoulders. It wasn't closure, but it was a crack. And sometimes, light only gets in through cracks. That evening, when the last guest had gone and the house had settled back into its exhale, Lena lit a single candle in the cellar. The portraits of Minha and Han Tran hung side by side, now the same woman. 2 lives, reunited. She sat at her easel and returned to the painting she'd started weeks before. It was still rough, only the outlines of the house and garden, the suggestion of a figure seated with her back to the viewer. But tonight, Lena added new layers: warmth in the window light, tension in the brushstroke of the sky, a softness in the curve of the figure's spine. Not perfect, but honest. She titled it Inheritance. The summer rolled in without fanfare. No announcement. No abrupt shift, just longer days, warmer light, and the quiet growth of things Lena hadn't expected to bloom. By July, Na Quba had become more than a house. It had become a rhythm. Artists arrived, rested, created, and left pieces of themselves behind: poems taped to the fridge, sketches tucked under tea trays, love notes written in watercolor and pinned beside the herb garden. Lena didn't collect these mementos. She let them stay. Let them live in the corners of the space like breathing artifacts. She no longer flinched when asked what she did for a living. She no longer needed to prove that choosing a life outside the mold was not failure, but faith. On the last Saturday of the month, the house held its final open gallery evening before closing for a private residency session. The rooms glowed with soft light. The scent of lemongrass and oil paint lingered in the air, and soft Vietnamese jazz played from an old record player someone had donated for the mood. Visitors wandered the gallery, sipping iced tea with mint and marveling at both the resurrected works of Min Ha and the quietly revolutionary concept of the house itself. One woman, standing in front of Lena's newest piece, Inheritance, turned to her and asked, "How did you know what to build here?" Lena smiled. "I didn't." The woman tilted her head. "But it's perfect." "It's not perfect," Lena said. "It's just honest." That night, after the guests had gone and the teacups had been washed and stacked, Lena walked the garden path alone. The rosemary bush rustled gently in the breeze, and the moon hung low over the roof of the house. She carried with her the notebook, now nearly full, where she had written every part of the journey, from the family gathering, to the lawyer's words, to the renovations, the letters, the arguments, the unexpected visitors, the secrets unearthed, and the softness returned. She sat on the bench her grandmother once favored, placed the notebook on her lap, and opened to the last blank page. Then she wrote, "I used to think that success would feel like fireworks. but it feels like this. Like soil under your nails from repotting someone else's grief. Like walking through a room where no one claps but everyone breathes easier. Like being called a failure and realizing you no longer need the word success to feel whole. Like knowing you could close the doors forever, and something would still echo inside these walls. That echo is mine, and it's enough. She paused, then signed her name beneath it. Not in cursive, not in print, just in her own hand. A blend of her grandmother's grace and her own groundedness. Lena Tran. She closed the notebook and looked up at the stars. They weren't as bright as the ones over the mountain town her grandmother had once fled, but they were steady, familiar, constant. Like the sound of clay being shaped in the studio. Like the scent of soup on the stove. Like the hush before a paintbrush touches canvas. She rose and stepped back inside, locking the door behind her. A few days later, she received a letter from a young artist who had just completed their stay. Dear Lena, before I came to your house, I thought rest was something I had to earn. I didn't know I was allowed to stop running. Thank you for giving me back the part of myself I had almost forgotten. May this place always be what it was for me, not a retreat, but a return, with deep gratitude, P.T. She posted the letter on the wall above the entryway, alongside others like it. A quiet chorus. No headlines, no awards, just proof. That presence could be inherited. That silence could be sacred. That failure, when chosen well, could be a doorway. And when the family came again months later, for a shared meal, not a reckoning, she welcomed them not with triumph, but with tea, not with a speech, but with soup. She let them see what she'd built, if they were willing to really look. Some did, some still didn't. But none of it changed what the house had become. On the final night of the season, Lena stood once more at the front gate. The wind danced through the bamboo arch, and the stars were shy but present. She took a deep breath and whispered, "Not to anyone, not for anyone, Ba. I did it." Not because she needed to say it, but because it was true.